Man, that was a rant. That was a multi-location rant. I got in the car and I still had more shit to say. Talking about glucose gets me fired up. Sure, everyone can relate.
Now, I'm certainly not advocating for Panera Bread. In fact, I think their food is pretty mediocre, kind of like most chains, even though I eat breakfast here like 3 days a week. But Panera Plus, or whatever it's called, unlimited coffee for like $9 a month, and I get coffee here every single day. So it's like $60 worth of coffee for $9 a month.
So one of the trend words sort of in the health and wellness area right now is metabolic health. I think when a lot of these companies and people are talking about metabolic health, generally speaking, they're going to be referring to glucose and blood glucose levels. That's certainly not all encompassing. Glucose is definitely a part of metabolic health, and it's probably just the easiest and most accessible thing to measure, but it's definitely not all there is to it. But today I am going to be talking about glucose. That's what I'm talking about. So the reading I just took on my phone, that comes from a device that I slap on the back of my arm. It's called a continuous glucose monitor. It's not as accurate as a finger stick or a blood draw, just because this is interstitial fluid, and interstitial fluid is always going to be a little bit less accurate, and it's always going to be trailing from actual blood glucose. But for simplicity's sake, it's accurate enough. So there are a lot of companies that are getting into the metabolic health space and the glucose space, which is definitely a good thing. It's going to become a more mainstream concept, which is definitely good for the general overall health of the people in this country. The fact that more companies are starting to invest in it, thinking that it's going to be something that people are going to be caring about over the next 5-10 years, and I definitely agree with that. Here's my problem. Everyone's talking about the same things, and it's not a complete conversation. Everyone's talking about nutrition and exercise. Both very important, but again, not a complete look at what needs to be done and what needs to be talked about when you're talking about glucose disposal and glucose levels. So nutrition, yes, you should try to keep your glucose levels stable throughout the day, try to avoid these big ping-ponging spikes. Yes, obviously I agree with that. Exercise consistently. During more intense exercise, you're going to become glycolytic. Your body's going to mobilize glucose for energy. So that's going to actually raise blood glucose. Your liver's going to start spitting out glucose. So you actually expect glucose to go up in those instances. And then during lower intensity stuff, like a zone 2 day, fat utilization, you expect glucose to actually stay pretty stable. Those are expected things. Nobody's really talking about skeletal muscle mass, and I don't understand why. Because you can only store glucose in two places, the liver and muscle tissues. The liver has like a finite amount. I think it's 400 calories. So like you can store like 100 grams of glycogen. It's not that much. Muscle cells also, or muscle tissues also have a finite amount they can hold, but unlike the liver, you can actually increase the amount of muscle tissue you have in your body. So you can create a larger disposal system to get glucose out of the bloodstream. And yet everyone's always just talking about, keep your glucose level stable and exercise. Yes, I completely agree. But if you don't have enough skeletal muscle mass, good luck clearing glucose. Like, you're gonna have to be low carb forever. And it's just like one more thing that people need to be afraid of now. It's like, now I need to be afraid of my glucose levels all day too. I need to be afraid of carbs. It's like, no, you don't. Like, you can eat a decent amount of carbs. You can even just go fucking carb crazy for a meal. And if you have enough skeletal muscle mass and you exercise regularly and generally speaking you eat well, you're gonna be fine. You're gonna get a huge glucose spike, and guess what? Within 2 hours you're gonna be stabilized. If you have somewhere to put all that glucose. If you don't and you do that consistently, yes, that's gonna be bad. But people are humans. They're not going to be on a strict diet always forever. There's always going to be lapses and people are going to slip up, or you have a special occasion and you're just going to have cake or whatever the example is. At some point, you're going to have a bolus of carbs and glucose. Can your body handle it? Because if you're always eating a low carb and you're always trying to keep your glucose below 110, you're never actually testing your system. You're never testing the system to see like how well is insulin actually doing its job? How insulin sensitive are you? Can you take in a bolus of glucose and clear it effectively like your body is supposed to be able to do?
So all of this matters because of what happens when you have excess glucose and nowhere to put it. Muscle tissue's full of glycogen, liver's full of glycogen. What are you going to do with it? At that point, it's already out of the bloodstream and it's back in the liver, but it's full. So the glycogen or the glucose turns into glycerol. Glycerol becomes a backbone for 3 fatty acids, and that's known as a triglyceride. When you get enough triglycerides in the liver, they need to go somewhere, so they get packaged into a lipoprotein known as a VLDL, and that gets exported out into the bloodstream. There's about 47 steps in there that I skipped, and frankly that I don't understand well enough to really explain, but excess triglycerides, not ideal. And yes, obviously I have my biases coming from a personal training background. You know, what's the personal trainer going to care about most? Muscle mass, obviously. I think it is important though, and I think enough people aren't talking about this in sort of the metabolic health glucose space. Muscle mass fucking matters. So again, the point of all this, it's basically just my frustration that like people aren't doing more about the fragility mindset of being scared of one more thing. Like people should not be scared of carbs. You should focus on putting on more muscle mass, and then you don't have to be scared of carbs.
Man, that was a rant. That was a multi-location rant. I got in the car and I still had more shit to say. Talking about glucose gets me fired up. Sure, everyone can relate.